Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lessons from Leaders podcast. Today, I am blessed to have Noah on the pod. He is the founder and CEO of MacTez. They are an IT consulting firm based in New York. And Noah has an amazing background, which, shows why he's been successful for 30 plus years at this company. But Noah was in a previous life an architect slash designer, and also photographer and event producer. And he had an extensive background in technology from college, which he pivoted into his firm, MacTez, today. So, Noah, thank you so much for being here. And I think this is an amazing story that we're going to get a lot of lessons out of and, continue to pass that on to the listeners. So, thank you for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm going to try not to be that old fogey who talks about 30 years ago back in my day. So technology has changed a lot, but I think a lot of the lessons are all very evergreen and still very relevant.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And first question, man, I would love to hear, what were you focusing on in tech back in college? Where, because like you said, everything is exponentially changed. So
When
back in college, what really sparked this and what were you focusing on? What were the focuses then?
My interest in technology, so it's worth note that when I was in college, email was still sort of a new thing. The idea of like surfing the web and like looking on a web browser didn't exist yet, so that gets a little context there. My father, actually, interestingly, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but in my younger years, despite being an English professor, was very sort of technologically curious and sophisticated. He used this terminal computer in the 80s to typeset one of his academic books. So even as a child, I remember he brought home an early prototype of the Lisa computer, which was the predecessor to the Macintosh. But I remember playing with Lisa Draw, which was the sort of like drawing application, which was terrible, but was amazing and truly eye-opening. So even in my sort of middle school and high school years, I think I was fascinated by the things that were possible. Through design and publishing, I actually spent quite a bit of time at a summer camp. I actually was a silversmith for a little while, for about 5 years at a summer camp. Speaking of other lives. And separate from that, I also spent a bunch of time in this publication shop, which was right at the moment when a lot of kind of desktop publishing was becoming mainstream, and people were using computers to create page layouts and halftone images, and so it was a very interesting kind of moment where there was a real popularization and accessibility to some of these design tools that just didn't exist even a few years before. And so I really enjoyed kind of the lucky bit of timing when I got out of college. I had done a lot of theater in college. I was actually sort of obsessed with lighting and sound design. I did a lot of theatrical design as well. A lot of that, I think, carries forward. A lot of the technology of like acoustics and sound and lighting is, while part of architecture, is also still in this day and age a very big part of technology. Our company does a bunch of like conferencing systems. So having a room that has the appropriate acoustics and the lighting that is adequate for the kind of need that you have. So lots of through lines there that 30 years later or 35 years later still carry through. But I think a big part of what was interesting about that moment in time is that a lot of things that are now kind of consolidated and kind of what I call consumerified. They exist in like an easily accessible and they really work. A lot of them just didn't work. They all seemed like interesting ideas. The first summer really after college, I went out to California and worked for a German design firm called Meta Design. And I vividly remember watching videos on the internet, because it had launched at that point, and they were these like little postage stamp QuickTime videos that were like, I think that's a person dancing. Is that a baby? I'm not sure what that is. And it, in contrast to the sort of the world we live in now, where sort of you can walk around on a cell phone and have streaming video with your grandmother on the other side of the planet. So truly amazing how much those kind of little things have changed. But I think a big part of that experience for me when I first got to the city is, as a favor for a thesis advisor of mine, I agreed to do some kind of computer setup, thinking I was just going to like help out before I got back to design work, and then just really found myself drawn to the problem solving, the working within constraints, the idea of like, hey, there's a continuously changing environment here. which allows you to sort of always have something new and interesting and unexpected to sort of learn. And as somebody who really, I think, gets off on and enjoys and is sort of excited about kind of new opportunities to learn and to understand things, technology has, I think, been a really gratifying space. Also, being CEO and boss is, I think, in a parallel way, an area where your job description is constantly changing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And for you, in this time of where we're just seeing rapid advancement in tech and everything that's going on, what are you and the firm observing? Like, what are some of those key issues and problems? Because you've, seen tech, you know, kind of advance like this, and now it's even crazier. But for you, what have you seen, for y'all personally? What have been some of the biggest challenges?
I mean, some of the biggest professional challenges in that period were not really technological. I think a lot of what's interesting about the technologies is that the way that they change can often be both a benefit and a challenge. I don't think it's positive thinking isn't the answer, of course, but there are a lot of components to technology where you're like, this has downsides and this has upsides. Obviously, we're in an industry where hopefully we're able to kind of leverage and amplify the upsides. I think examples of that are, for instance, we're in an era now where you and I are able to record this, on a easily accessible platform that works really well. We didn't spend 40 minutes doing troubleshooting mics and speakers before we got on. We even have virtual backgrounds that look pretty good. And it's like, it's a very different set of technology stack, kind of tool set available really to, if not everybody, almost everybody. And similarly, I think we're in a space where a lot of and again, this is maybe speaking more kind of what's coming as opposed to what's here. We're in space where a lot of the tools that enable people to manage their accounts, their information, that share information with the people they want to share it with, but not share it with people they don't want to share it with. A lot of those tools are just dramatically more accessible and more resilient and more straightforward now than they were even 10 years ago. One of the things our company does a lot of is something called identity management, which is really using a cloud-based tool to kind of say, hey, I'm Noah, and this is my name, and this is my password, and my email address, and here's my multi-factor, and here is like this other thing that kind of proves that I am who I say I am, and how do I ensure when I log into all of these different services that it's still me, and how does my employer and my coworkers and my peers, how do they have confidence that like my identity is protected properly? And I think that's an area that has been around for a while, but has sort of matured in maybe at most the last 5 to 10 years, and is very exciting. It's I think something that people also recognize the need for from a security and from a kind of like workflow and information sharing perspective.
Mhm. Yeah. And, we talk about tech advancing and you advancing in your career and just learning more and more and more. Um, but for you as a founder and a CEO, what do you feel like has been the biggest lessons you've learned as you advanced in that title, in that position? Because tech is advancing all around you. You set up your people to be successful. But for you as, like you said, the boss, what has that been like for you?
I I think there's actually an interesting answer to that right now, which is managing people. I think one of the most difficult things for me was trying to understand how to manage people well. People are human beings. I think it's important to treat people like people, to respect them. But also, it's important to have a diverse group of people on your team. You don't want every person to be a clone of you who looks at everything the same way you do. If you do, then your output won't be as good as if you have a really a wide range of people. If you are somebody who's really gregarious and outgoing, it's really great to have collaborators and partners who are a little more interested in the nitty gritty and kind of, the quiet, the busy, kind of slow slogging work. And similarly, if you're somebody who's got a great attention to detail, you want somebody in your mix who's sort of like taking a step back and not getting too caught up in the trees and can really see the forest. So there's a lot of different aspects, I think, to managing people, which I'm certainly no expert, but managing people, I think, is an important skill, which is only becoming more important now, in that a lot of the way that I talk and in my organization we talk about managing AI and about managing tools is thinking of those processes more and more like managing people, thinking of it as like, how do you set expectations? How do you verify that the thing that you asked be done was done the way you thought it was going to be done? How do you confirm that it's being done consistently? So a lot of the learned techniques that are necessary for somebody to be a competent, maybe good, but certainly competent manager, I think also translate into, at least in the next year or two, will translate into the skills required to manage a lot of tech stack components. It's very
Mm,
interesting. I would not have guessed that 10 years ago as a sort of a merger of skill sets.
yeah, that is very interesting. And we talk about it sometimes with some of my friends who are in, similar boats as you with similar businesses. But how are you starting to see? Because what we're starting to see is, the people who can orchestrate the AI systems and the tech are the ones who are going to win. So for you with your clients and as you move forward, has that kind of been the area of focus? Like how can we come in and orchestrate everything to be that not one-stop shop, but somebody who can kind of give them a whole piece?
I think it's still too soon to say what aspects of sort of the technology, particularly, statistical machine learning, generative AI, LLMs. I think it's still too soon to say which of those will actually be beneficial for individuals and individual organizations, and which ones will be problematic. And part of the reason I say that is, I've had a number of conversations over the last year, for example, with friends that are in the kind of like GTM, in the like marketing and sales worlds, and it's been interesting to see how many of them a couple of years ago would have a man or a woman or a person they would pay to sit there making outbound telephone calls and like writing emails, and then somewhere in there that transitioned to a bunch of like automated scripts and sequences and Apollo and all these other tools, and things got better. But then those things got dramatically better maybe in the last year. But I've noticed a number of people saying, well, the problem is they get better, but then there's also so many of them and the cost of doing them is so low that people are starting to grow concerned that essentially people will lose interest. They will essentially no longer look at messages from a person they don't already know. And if it's an electronic outreach from a stranger, they'll just be like, probably a bot. Um, and I've had more and more of those conversations, even just in the last few months, as the quality of those communications has gotten, in many cases, indistinguishable from a human being. I don't know if that's entirely true, but I think it's certainly close, if not actually there. Then it's a question of like, well, how much longer will I keep responding to these messages if I can't tell whether I'm actually talking to a person or not? And I think the good answer is that the quality of those has to improve. They have to be like finding people and offering them what they actually need now. A friend who once described good sales is connecting people to the things they want and need, not selling them things they don't need. So I think that there's still opportunities and possibilities there, but I do think it's a little bit, there's a risk that the industry essentially commoditizes high quality messaging so much so that you lose the ability to form new relationships with people you haven't already met. It's part of the reason why we started the TED Tech event series, the in-person one. Is I do feel like in-person events offer a little bit of an antidote to that. But it is interesting to see how across different industries, especially, how that has changed, and I think will change. That having been said, there are a number of incredible tools. This is more of the answer I imagine that your audience is expecting, is excited. There are some amazing tools. I talk a lot about the consumerification of products in our book, the Tame the Tech Beast book, and one of the concepts in that is that these technologies that used to require a person to like buy a box and install software and configure it and understand how DNS worked and connect all these different components together, then maybe it turned into like an AWS version of that in the cloud. Now, many of those things, you just go to sort of a service, you drop in a credit card, maybe it's connected to your Microsoft or Google account, and then 10 minutes later, you're fully up and running with a tool that would have taken, days and days a few years ago. And that I think is very incredible. It means that there's a real distribution of access to these tools. I'm hoping that people will use them for really cool things. They'll create great products, and that we'll have this sort of ecosystem that's very dynamic. But there is a little bit of a risk there, of course, that we'll have junk too.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's funny you talk about, the bombarding of messages or just the age of AI that we're in now too. Like we see this as well, where people are starting to put more emphasis on creating content and writing things that are in their voice, doing just a selfie video that's just them speaking. So
Prove it,
people
it's me, I'm
feel
the real
like,
person. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, okay, now we feel like we know them. They're not just hitting us with this message and it could be a rented account or something like that. They don't even know. Um, but it's true that it seems like everything is just, and this is what we see with Vine coming back, in my opinion, where
Mhm.
Vine, they're having everybody record videos in the app and do everything in the app. So it feels more like we're trying to get a little back towards that personal piece, if you're seeing the same thing.
I think one way to describe what you're alluding to is the idea of authenticity. I think people want authentic connection. I don't think there's anything intrinsically like impossible about using these assistive tools to help create authentic, but it does also mean that there's a risk. It's easier to create inauthentic experiences. I think people who have good media have always had like an Instagram boyfriend or a camera operator or an editor or a person doing lighting. Like one of the things photography teaches you is all photography is lying and sort of misrepresentative in some sense. At a minimum, you're choosing like when to take the picture, whether to take the picture from the person's good side or their bad side, whether they're hunched over or whether they're standing up straight. Those are all things, whether they're smiling or frowning. Those transform what you think of and of that person and how you feel when you see them. And all video and all those kind of stuff does have a quality to that. You can have bad or good components, and I think it's interesting to see how aspects of authenticity are seen as positive. But ultimately, I think we also live in an era where people have a higher degree of media literacy, so people are better on camera. Not everybody, of course, but many people are like comfortable on camera and enjoy just talking. And we do live in a wonderful time where the tools that enable people who are good can have whatever old cell phone from they can have an iPhone from 5 years ago and it still produces great video as long as the light's decent. And there's something pretty wonderful about how broadly the voices and the stories that are out there can really be created and disseminated. I'm also particularly fascinated by that because one of my other side things is I'm a nonprofit board president of an organization called Union Docs, which is a documentary film or nonfiction art, they often say. And it's a residency, so it's also a physically in-person group. They actually have a physical building in Queens. But I think documentary art and nonfiction are particularly kind of important right now. This idea of like what is verisimilitude, what is real, what is true, and because it's documentary art, some of the work that they create isn't necessarily like we're setting up a tripod and documenting a thing. They do reenactments, they do animations, they do recreations. So it's sort of understanding that even within the realm of nonfiction, there is still this sort of variability of means and tools and mechanisms in order to communicate something that's hopefully sincere and authentic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really liked your analogy from, photography and everything you learned there. Um, and what we've talked about on the few episodes as well is, taking learnings from previous life. So we had a, Grammy award winning musician who's pivoted that into his business. We had a former athlete actually in the same sport that I did, which was crazy. We didn't even know that. But
Amazing.
he takes his lessons from athletics. Um, so for you, what do you feel like were the biggest lessons that you took from those times, either being, photographer, architect? What do you feel like were the biggest lessons you learned early on that had made you successful in your
Yeah.
current company?
Uh, I think there's a quality to, and again, I don't think these are absolutes in these fields, but there's a quality in my experience of architecture. Again, I did undergraduate architecture, and then I did a bunch of internships and a bunch of projects, but I never was what would be called a practicing architect. I never sort of finished my training and never got my testing and certification. I actually did an event as part of the TED-A-Tech, the in-person event series last year, with a good friend of mine who's the head of architecture at MIT. And we specifically did this sort of tete-a-tete on, we called it after architecture. And the idea was, what are the sort of educational lessons that out of these 25 people in the room, that you learned essentially from the educational kind of paradigms and processes and ideals of architecture as a course in an area of study? and how do those apply to things which are not about building buildings or designing interiors? I sometimes like to joke, half seriously, maybe 90% seriously, that architecture is, as an undergraduate degree or as a pre-professional degree, is sort of a spatial and volumetric liberal arts. It's sort of like you want to understand all of the visuals. You have a painting and lighting and sound and physical space, but also like the history of the building and the like why is the geopolitical context that we're in, like what is this land, what did it used to be? And so there's a quality to architecture that I think can be this like really broad spatial idea of culture and knowledge, and I think that translates. It's also, I happen to be someone who really likes like volume and space. I'm currently this week in the process of moving apartments, and the idea of like sitting and sort of like ruminating, like where should the lights be, and like where should I move that door somewhere? And so we have contractors showing up tomorrow morning at 8, and I do think applying some of those sensibilities to everyday life is certainly one of the things that I cherish, and I like to sort of argue that a lot of that kind of idea of thinking about things within constraints. In other words, in architecture, you never have an unlimited budget, and you often have physical, structural things like the thing will fall over if you don't do this or you don't do that, and you can only have so many windows and so many doors, and so there's something sort of intrinsic within the field of architecture about like what are the constraints that you're thinking about when you're thinking about what a good solution looks like, and I do think in a lot of technology and in a lot of business, that's a very real kind of starting point. It's wonderful to brainstorm, but there very quickly has to become a space where you say like, well, what are we actually going to do? Like, what's the budget and what's the timetable and who needs to be involved? And I think those are some of the lessons that for me were hugely influential and very informative over time.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And at MacTez now, you know, where do you see the company advancing to? What's your vision, for the next however many years you want to run it? What does all of that look like for you?
It is a great question. My business partner and the co-founder, Michael, who is the co-author of the book Tame the Tech Beast I mentioned earlier, he and I have had a bunch of conversations. We're both coming up on our mid-50s. Both of us really like what we're doing. I think we're probably going to keep doing this for a while, 10, 15, 20. I don't know exactly how long that'll go on forever, but maybe 20 is a bit ambitious, but certainly 10 or 15 seems quite reasonable. We have an amazing sort of team where we're a little under 20 people. I think we're currently around 15, 16 right now. And we're distributed. We're not all in New York. We're about half in New York, half scattered. We kind of went mostly hybrid during COVID, and so hired people outside of the New York area. We do have a physical space in New York. Among the many things that we do build physical infrastructure. So we have a team that actually does like physical installation and networking and access control and conferencing and all that kind of stuff. So having a physical office is extremely helpful. As far as sort of like where and what the next indeterminate number of years looks like, the industry is changing so quickly right now. I'm very curious to see what companies like ours look like 5 to 10 years from now. There's a lot of very interesting business things happening where venture capital and private equity have a really profound impact on sort of what kind of business structures make sense. And similarly, there's a sort of an adage from the gold rush, the California gold rush days, of the people who made the most money during the California gold rush in the early days were actually the people who sold the tools, the sort of sifting pans and the various backhoes. Like the people who sold tools to the gold miners were the ones who actually made money, not the gold miners themselves. And I think about that a lot in the context of a lot of technology consultancy now is about using and leveraging a mixture of different tools effectively. And so it's interesting to think as some of those tools roll up, is the term, into larger kind of conglomerates, which of them stay good or get better and which of them get worse. There's one particular product called Jump Cloud, which is a sort of it is among many things, but it's an identity management platform that it's a fantastic product. I think it sits at a really clever, interesting space. It's really sort of like a next generation replacement for a lot of Microsoft Active Directory. And so we do a lot of work in that space. We're really close with that organization. And I'm excited to see what that product and many others like it, how they evolve over the next 5 to 10 years. And yeah, I do feel like in some ways the agentic AI side stuff, we're like just at a point where every 3 months whatever we thought was going to happen isn't quite what happened. And I have enough of these conversations that I feel like I'm not, I either don't have the hubris or I don't have the confidence, I'm not sure which it is, to sort of say too much in terms of predictions. But it is clear that there are changes. My one piece of advice that I got when I was much, much younger, which I still think of quite regularly, especially in very dynamic moments like this, are um, the people who you look at and you say that person was a genius because they saw this thing coming, 10, 20 years ago. Most of the time, 100 people predicted 100 different things, and the person who looks like a genius is just the one who was luckier than the other 99. And so I think it's important, particularly if you're ever down on yourself as a business owner and you're like, why am I not, Zuckerberg or some super wealthy person? Remembering that there's like 1,000 other not Zuckerbergs who were doing exactly the same thing at exactly the same time, but just didn't happen to get lucky with their timing and business deals and partnerships, didn't happen to be in the right place at the right time to answer the door when opportunity knocked. So my one kind of like general reminder to myself, which I think is maybe helpful to others, is sort of like, don't bust your own chops. Give yourself a little breather there, and acknowledge that luck is a huge factor in these things. And so the one piece of advice on that would be try to keep your eyes open, be aware of the opportunities in front of you, but don't become too obsessively driven about feeling like there's an answer and you have to know it and you have to know the path. I think it's super important to kind of assess where you are, make a bunch of choices, start doing stuff, and then pick some point in time and stop, look around and be like, should I keep doing what I was doing? Maybe I should stop digging. Maybe I should go over there and dig. And like, that's okay. That's not a failure. That's a critical part of the business process.
Yeah, that's true, man. I really like the example of Zuckerberg because I actually met someone here in Miami a few months ago now he's, in his 50s. He's had a very successful career building a new tech platform. But he showed me the project he built around the time Zuckerberg was building Facebook,
Yeah.
and it was the same product. And he
Okay.
said, I just ditched the project. It was timing. It didn't work for me, and I moved on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So it's true. I met somebody firsthand who was in that same boat.
It's so
That's
it's so it's so incredible how like little moments of luck really have this like, incredible profound contrast.
yeah, 100%. And also, I want to say, man, you look 35 for being in your mid 50s. We got to hear what the health routine is for you. How does
I
that
I got I mean, a part of it is good. I think good, and by good I mean bad lighting. Just don't I used to joke in the 1950s that you'd put some Vaseline on the camera for the glamour shots. I feel like the modern age of like video compression does help with that a little bit. Also, I got really lucky that I'm not as gray as I could be. So as long as I got hair and I'm not too gray, I'm gonna try to take advantage of that and show it off.
Yeah, I love it, man. I love it. Awesome. This has been great, man. We got a lot of great lessons on technology, on leadership, on building something of your own, and staying aware, especially in today's world as everything advances so fast. But really, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about everything that y'all have going on, events, what's coming down the pipe, book, anything like that. Where can people find you?
So the main business website is MacTez. MacTez, by the way, is not Macintosh related, despite the sound. It's actually it's my mother's maiden name. It's a family name. So MacTez.com, MacTez. We do have a page on there called Events, and one of the things I like to talk about in contexts like this is we have this in-person event series called Teta Tech, kind of like head to head, and the Teta Tech series is really small. It's about 20, 30 people in a room, really intimate. We have wine and some, frankly, pretty good cocktails and some great snacks. It's after work on a Thursday. We do roughly one every month or two. We have one coming up on June 4th, which is going to be really great. And then we have two in July, unusually, because we're taking off August. The very next one, which I would encourage people to go check out if the topic's interesting, is called Post Westphalia. It's the future of money and nation states. It's all about reserve currency and what's the history. I'm actually doing it with Mark, who was the head of blockchain at MasterCard. So it's a really great heavy hitter with a really interesting perspective. The next one after that is going to give you a sense of the incredibly wide variety of strange topics here. The next one is called Organizing the Unorganizable, How Digital Tech Reshapes Artistic Legacy. And that's with Francine, who is the archivist at Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, which is a longtime client of ours. And she's going to be talking about how Rauschenberg's dyslexia affects the process and the taxonomy and the organization of his archives. Because there's a whole interesting thing of like, do you record something based on the phonetic spelling versus on the word that you think he was trying to say, and what does that mean in terms of archives in the modern age and about machine translation and intention? So super interesting topic, particularly for anybody who likes Rauschenberg's work or really interested in the idea of like what happens to an artist's legacy after they've died, and who is the sort of team that translates that into a catalog raisonné and all of the other things that happen in the high-end art world. And then the third one at the very end of July is with the CEO of formerly MakerBot, now called Ultimaker, Ultimaker the US, Jim, and that is called Modern Alchemy, the New Era of 3D Printing. And it is on the like material technology, all the super interesting sort of like material tech additive combination stuff that's happening that is kind of like making 3D printing able to do some like really, really interesting, amazing stuff it couldn't do 10 years ago. So it's three very different talks with different people. And we do about 6 to 12 of these a year. So if those three don't work for anybody who's in New York, but they might, do subscribe. We send an email out periodically once every month or two, and Teta Tech is that. And then the only other plug is the book. We just finally got our book out, Tame the Tech Beast, which is Michael and I finally, after years and years and years of having conversations with really amazing people where we were like, oh, I really wish you could have had this conversation a year ago before you did that. So the book was our attempt to be like, hey, before you do that thing, here's some things you might want to think about. So we're really hoping that it gets into the hands of some business owners, some startup leads, some great thinkers, and it's a really no nonsense, great, really accessible. We had the honor of having Cindy Gallup interview us for the book launch, and she had some fantastic things to say about it that are up on the website. So really, really great. Definitely feel like founders, particularly if you're a non-technical founder, I would love for you to pick up a copy of the book and make sure you don't make any mistakes that could be avoided.
That's awesome, man. Awesome. Doing great work, serving great clients, and sharing his lessons. So, Noah, really appreciate the time. This has been amazing. I've learned. I know a ton of people are going to learn, and I already know the first founder I'm going to send this to right when we publish it. So,
Awesome. Thanks
appreciate
so
the
much for
time,
having me.
man.
Thank you so much. Great for having me on.